This is a Film Stories original podcast.
We made this.
My name is Pat Skipper. I played Bill Scully Jr. on The X-Files, and you're listening to The X-Cast.
Welcome to the X-Cast. The truth is in here. My name is Kurt North, and thank you for continuing to watch or listen even to our continuing coverage of Season 8 of the X-Files. We are at the penultimate episode this week in Essence, Season 8, Episode 20, and it was directed by Kim Manners and written by Chris Carter. Joining me this week to discuss this is Michael J. Petty, back from our Season 7 coverage. I think it was Signs and Wonders we last spoke, Michael, I believe.
Yep, that was it.
Yeah, so it's nice to have you on a mythology episode, and how are things?
Things are great. My first daughter was just born just this past week. And that was super exciting and stressful and fun. And I'm running on fumes, but I'm happy to be here.
Quite apt considering the story arc that we're talking about in pregnancy and things as well. So
it really worked out that way.
It did, yeah. It's almost as if you planned this, Michael. You planned around this. You planned to get married and to have a kid, all in the perfect timing to talk about Essence.
Yes.
We've been talking to most people this season about Season 8 and how they feel about it, because Season 8 can be divisive in a lot of quarters, especially given that David Duchovny's not in for pretty much half of the season. What do you make to Season 8, both mythology and Monster of the Week stuff and the inclusion of Doggett and the like?
Season 8 for me, growing up, was always a kind of an odd one, because obviously Mulder isn't in it, and Mulder was my favorite character, and so for him to be gone for the majority of the season was a real shock. And beyond that, you get introduced to Doggett right off the bat who you're kind of not supposed to like. I don't know what it is, whether it's my love for Terminator 2 or Robert Patrick or whatever, but I ended up loving Doggett pretty much immediately. And I know you're not supposed to, but he's a loyal and hardworking and honest kind of guy that I would absolutely want in my corner. Just the way he is with Scully, and even with Mulder, when they interact, even though they have some sort of rivalry, it's just really different. For the X-Files, but it's different in a way that I think for many fans at the time was bad and jarring, but looking back on it and watching these episodes now with the complete series, I actually think is good. I actually think helps keep the show fresh in a lot of ways. For a long time, I think I would have said Season 7 should have been the end to the X-Files. And I think I'm not alone in that. More recently, and rewatching a lot of Season 8, with you guys and doing a lot of that, I don't know if I agree with that anymore. I think I really like Season 8. I think it adds a lot to the series. I think this idea that Scully is now the believer is a fascinating idea. After so many years of her not seeing anything, or inconveniently not seeing something, and now having to be in Mulder's shoes because he's gone, I think it really works. And I think Robert Patrick kills it as John Doggett, and it's an impossible task. I think he succeeds with flying colors. And honestly, even in Season 9, which, Season 9 is probably my least favorite season, and that's not to say I don't love it, but he's still phenomenal in that. He's a reason why I continue watching and really, really enjoy it, even though Mulder and Scully aren't together for the vast majority of that season. So I think there's a lot to love about Season 8. There's some really good Monster of the Week episodes. Roadrunners stands out for me personally, and I think the introduction of the super soldiers and the mythology, and we'll get into this, but I think it's very interesting. And when the syndicate's gone, you have to do something compelling to continue the plot. And I think for the most part, it really works. So
I ended up watching Essence right through to Nothing Important Happened Today 2, which was an interesting experience. It was, the fact that I've restarted Season 9. I mean, I'm a big defender of 9 for differing reasons. Yes, it's still my least favorite, I think, out of the entire run. I'm not saying there isn't some really bad eggs in there and choices haven't been made. And I was thinking about this today, and it might come out in this discussion. But we are here to talk about Essence, and it's written by Chris Carter. So again, I think for me, this is a really, really strong episode. And Chris Carter does get a lot of stick about some of the episodes that he writes, but there is episodes that he does in mythology which kind of stand above, and I do think this is one of them. I think This Is Not Happening earlier in the season is a fantastic episode. Dead Alive I'm not as fond of, and I feel a little bit the same with this. I think Essence is a much better episode than the follow-up in Existence. I do have, like I said in This Is Not Happening, if you haven't heard it already, is I do have a bit of a problem with the vertebrae. But we'll leave that to the very end of this episode. And I do feel the even though Existence is still a great episode, I do feel it dips from Essence, and I don't think it really attains any that beyond this episode from a mythology point of view. I don't think it gets to this kind of level again. What are your general thoughts on Essence then, as in your general overview of it, and what would you personally rate it out of 10?
I think what's really cool about Essence is that it opens the door for a new possibility, for just plenty of new possibilities. Not only do you introduce like all these super soldier concepts, which obviously have already been kind of introduced, but they're more refined here, I would say. You're tying everything in together, and in a way that really works. You're tying in Scully's pregnancy, you're tying in Mulder and his kind of leaving it from the FBI, you're tying in Doggett's role in the story with No Roar and the super soldiers, and all of it's finally coming together. And, you have Krychek back as well. It feels very much like peak X-Files. I think it's probably probably the main episode, I would say, in season 8 that feels like the vast majority of the show. I think season 8 differs from a lot of the show because you don't have Mulder, obviously, but an episode like this where you have everybody together and you have this plot that is being uncovered and unraveled, and you have all these ties to people like Billy Miles and stuff like that, it just feels classic. In a way, I guess that's the best word I can use for it. And I agree with you. I like Essence more than I like Existence too. I think Existence is probably a more memorable episode in some ways just because of the events of it. But I think Essence is the better episode. It's stronger. And I think the reason why is because, as I said earlier, it opens up the door to so many different possibilities. And I think this is something that Chris Carter struggled with the revival seasons too, is he opens the door for all these really interesting and unique ideas. And then for a lot of fans, it doesn't exactly live up. And I think that's kind of the idea here with Essence and Existence as well. There's a lot in this episode that I don't know if it really follows through in the next episode. Like even just small things like Billy Miles killing all these people to cover up the conspiracy, but then witnessing Scully's birth and leaving, and and there's debate on that too. But no, I think this episode is excellent. Out of 10, I would definitely rate it around an 8 for sure, if not higher. I think the 8.4 rating on IMDb is accurate.
Wait, you took the words out of my mouth, so I'm not even going to mention IMDb now. That's great. I would say it's around about an 8.5, even like maybe even approaching a 9 for me. I think the propulsiveness towards I looked at it. Yes, I watched it twice yesterday. I watched it during the day, and then on the evening watched it again. A lot of the propulsion happens in the final 7 or 8 minutes. Yeah. It feels like it goes on forever, but the actual, the propulsion element of like sort of going around the FBI and, having this almost like the FBI under siege stuff, really feels like it's longer than it actually is. And it's like, oh my God, that's only like 7 minutes long, where I'm thinking it's like a full episode of like the FBI under siege, and it's not. But yeah, I would definitely say an 8.5 to 9 out of 10 for me. So let's dive bit further into the episode and take a deeper look into it. I think there is some elements I want to talk about at the end about Existence, just to get your opinion on that.
Absolutely.
And I also want to look at some things in a slightly different take, which we'll talk about when we come on the other side and talk about this in a bit more depth. The opening scene, I'm going to leave that to the end because I think that Essence scene with Mulder's monologue is quite intrinsic to the episode, and I feel for us that we need to maybe look at the episode before we look at the intrinsicness of what he's saying. But talking about season 8 being slightly different and a slightly different feel to it, and one of the things that I felt on this rewatch when we come into the baby shower scene is these scenes are not scenes that we often see in the X-Files. I mean, it jumped out at me. Something like Jersey Devil, where she's going to the party and she's the aunt and, the kids doing that and things. We don't see that outside world very much. Season 8, we do get elements. We get the pizza stuff earlier in the season. You have the pizza man and, things like that. So it has developed, as you say, into, and I think throughout this episode, there's moments like this, which we'll keep coming back to. There is a new kind of feel to this. There's more of the outside world seeping in, more of the home life seeping into the X-Files, and the baby shower is a perfect case in point.
I totally agree. I think what's interesting too about the baby shower is that usually in the X-Files, when we would see a scene like that, it would be in the cold open and it would lead to some sort of murder or grisly death, right? And that's obviously not what happens here. And I think that's intentional. I think there's an element of what Chris Carter's trying to do here that's he's trying to subvert your expectations right off the bat. And I think he really does that well with Duffy Haskell and what is her name? Lizzie Gill. That's right.
Lizzie Gill. Yeah.
Yeah. By setting them up earlier in the season, making them seem like they're going to be bigger players than they are, and then ripping that out from underneath us. And I think there's a lot of that here. And that's part of what makes Essence so excellent. This is not something we normally see from the X-Files, but it's something that, I don't know. I think I would be happy to see more of had the show gone longer. I'd be happy to see a little bit more day in the life of some of these characters, just because I think there's a lot of compelling stories you could tell from that vantage point.
Yeah, and I think it kind of, we talked about season 8 being more serialized, and I've been working on something at the moment, thinking about TV as a whole, and I don't know if you watched Lost when it aired. You've got like Twin Peaks and X-Files, then you've got Lost in 2004, then you've got the HBO stuff, so you kind of like moving through and then into streaming. And we've Lost it. It had its same problems that X-Files did with the network having interference and saying we don't want it to be a sci-fi show, we don't want this, we don't want that. And just this week, I think Damon Lindelof had said that ideally he would have liked it to be 4 seasons, not the 6 that we end up with. And you get that in the X-Files, as you mentioned earlier, season 7, was going to be a finish, season 8, and then, it was only late on, I believe, that Chris Carter signed on to do season 9, because he always said he would stay with Gillian and David.
Because they weren't sure they were getting a 9th season.
Yeah, so it's interesting that perspective. And I think likes of Lost, which does have more of a kind of a binge-worthy aspect to it, because it is one general story over it, and you could go different places. But at the same time, they had the pressures of network, like Fox did with X-Files. And then you get to things like The Leftovers, which is designed more of a case of like, you've got a full story that they're going to try and tell, and, that they learn things from Lost. And I think with X-Files, in that regard, the 8 seems to come across that way. And if it was more of a HBO show, you would get more of this stuff. You'd get more of like sort of the behind the scenes, and they'd take a bit more time with it and then go propulsive when they needed to. And I just find it's interesting that Lost has its like moments where season 5 and season 6 were short because of the writer's strikes and various things, and their episodes became 12, 13, 16 episode seasons, and that became the norm moving forward into the streaming era. And X-Files has started doing this syndication thing. Not syndicate. I keep saying syndication. This kind of overall story thing. And these elements are starting to bleed into the show, whereas like the X-Files at the start was a 45-minute TV show, and it was clear walls in between episodes, and it's blending in this time. And I think that is fascinating in this regard for like the baby shower, because it does feel like you're getting more of the outside world, and Chris Carter's more intrigued by that. And I do find that really good.
I think that's really common with shows that go on X amount of years, probably past 5 or 6 seasons, or maybe even more nowadays. But at that point, if you go past 5 or 6 seasons, I feel like there always comes a point where the show has to rebrand, because they need more viewers. And, over time, most shows lose audiences. Game of Thrones, I think, is a great example. And that's pretty common. I always think about Supernatural when I think about this, in that Eric Kripke wanted the show to be one certain thing. And when he had completed that story at the end of the 5th season, he left the show. And he didn't leave fully. He spent the next 10 years as a consultant producer, and, he's still the creator, and so he wrote even an episode or 2. But he really took a step back because he told the story he wanted to. And I think that's what's really interesting about Chris Carter here is Chris Carter seems really connected to Duchovny and Anderson, and wanting to continue working with them rather than he does have a fleshed out story or endpoint. Whereas I think in the Supernatural example, you have somebody who knows exactly from the get-go where he wanted the show to go. And even though it changed along the way, it ended up there by the end of his run. And of course, he went 10 more seasons, and there's various dips in quality at that point. But yeah, I think that's really common. And I think that's really interesting. Part of what makes season 8 such a strong season is the fact that it is so serialized. And I actually have said this many times. I host a Terminator podcast, and we're currently talking about the Sarah Connor Chronicles. And one of the things I love about that show is it's very serialized, but they also leave room for very standalone episodes that are very character centric. And that's something I love about television, is this ability to do Monster of the Week episodes that are standalone, character driven stories that you can watch again and again and again, and you don't need a broader context, while also having an overall story that grows your characters and the world around them as it develops. And season 8, I think, is really interesting because it tries really hard to be more serialized than not. In my opinion, that's probably part of what turned fans off to the season, because we were so used to Mulder and Scully do this case, and Mulder and Scully are on cops, and Mulder and Scully are doing this. I think that's very interesting, but I also think that's part of what makes season 8 so interesting and compelling, is their ability to weave things together the way that they do, even if it's not perfect.
Yeah, and I think just talking about numbers, I'll have to have a look on Wikipedia. I'm sure I saw this episode had around 12 million viewers, which is still,
still great,
really good. And season 8, it went up. The figures went up from season 7. So the fact that it's still getting those numbers is great. And talking about the serialization, we're back at Zeus Genetics in the next scene with Billy Miles. And there's a couple of things that happen in here which I find interesting in regards to like the story moving forward. There's Billy Miles turns up and sees Dr. Lev and calls the alien baby an abomination. The colonists have always been of the ilk of purity control and having this kind of like, we're the ultimate race kind of thing, and nothing can distill it. That, Billy Miles is someone that bleeds red blood, and he's been changed, but he's this super soldier aspect, this replicant, alien replicant that's been changed. But he still has almost like that foot soldier element to him, that, they are foot soldiers for the alien race, but they're not the same creatures as what the colonists would. Background being that they are the main antagonists. And like, this is not happening, for example, it's the same thing. Like I said during that episode, it's not about the alien spaceship above it, it's what's happening below. And in this, it's more about this thing about this abomination. I like that it's just one line, and it says so much about where we kind of are with the whole plot and the stripped back nature of it, but also this kind of this thought of like this abomination.
I totally agree. I think what's interesting too about the super soldiers, and especially Billy Miles in this case, is he feels a lot more like a reprogrammed Terminator than he does like an alien, right? And
yeah,
I think that's what's interesting about the alien replicants, is that the colonists are obviously changing people into infiltrators for their greater cause. But these people don't have their own personality necessarily. Yeah. They don't have their own free will necessarily. They're kind of a slave race, and a little bit kind of like what the cigarette smoking man and all of the syndicate were afraid would eventually happen to humanity. That's a very interesting idea, and I think it's done very well. And I think even in the ways that, those characters, run, as silly as that might sound, they feel more robotic than they do human. And I think that's intentional and by design, and I think it really works.
Yeah, it's definitely like Robert Patrick running after a car, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. That's all I could think about.
And I agree. I'm the same as you. When I heard that Robert Patrick was coming aboard, I've said this loads of times, it's T-1000's coming to X-Files. X-Files is my favourite show. Terminator 2 is one of my favourite movies. Great. Yeah. But yeah, talking about that, so the fact that you mentioned there about I said about the abomination, but the feel like they're programmed. Krychek comes to say that, doesn't he? He basically says their biological imperative is to prepare ourselves for the next invasion. And I never really thought about it in that way, but yeah, the biological imperative is making them say the things that they're saying, and they're not necessarily have their own agency. It's like it's through the actual reprogramming, which I never really thought of before.
Especially with Billy, because Billy, out of all of these super soldiers, is the one we really get to know beforehand. We know him from the pilot, we know him from Requiem, and he has a distinct personality. He is a person.
Yeah.
And when he comes back, he's not a person. I mean, it's very much like in T2 when the T1000 kills people and replaces them and is a little bit more robotic or, whatnot. So it's very much like that. It's not Billy Miles, actually. It's the colonists' agenda. It's the Skynet agenda programmed into them, So I think that's really interesting.
Requiem is so important.
Yeah.
As much as like everyone would talk about it potentially being an end, it's actually really important for a lot of other reasons. And in this sense, it's so important to understand where Billy's gone in the 7 years, what's happened since his post-abduction stuff in the pilot, and how he's outgrown that, and then his empathy for his dad and what happens to his father at that point is good, and it really comes across as well. Talking about personality, Doggett is watching NASCAR and cleaning his gun. I mean, there's nothing that can tell you about Doggett's personality than him watching NASCAR and cleaning his gun on a Saturday afternoon, is there?
No.
Oh, I found it good. And what I liked about this scene actually is, in Alone, there's a kind of a slight switch. The one thing that for me I get a little bit frustrated with is the Agent Doggett, Agent Mulder, Agent Scully repetitiveness. I found this one quite natural. I like the way that he was like Agent. Oh, it's not just it's plain old Mulder now. And then throughout the episode, we have those little connections with how they are talking to each other. The Mulder and Doggett stuff is working, and it's nice to see them talking about, as I say, the slight difference of 8. That we're getting that Vienna kind of feeling, but slightly different in that fact they are working together now, as they're not as antagonistic against each other. Yep. But Mulder is playing this kind of, I've put in my notes, more of a deep throat, quasi deep throat kind of character, where he's the one going, check the video, like he does in Erlenmeyer Flask, for example. Mm-hmm. And he's instilling in Doggett something that we will see in season 9, in that you get to a point where you've got to investigate more. You've got to start pissing people off, which he says a lot of. And I think it's a good way of actually bringing in, because Doggett has over season 8 has been quite passive, because he doesn't feel the X-Files is his to do much. It's been Scully kind of the one that's controlling most of the things, like I mentioned in Medusa. Like that one, for example, where Scully was in complete control of the situation. And Doggett isn't at the moment. He's the one that's taking a bit of a back seat, and Mulder's the one that's bringing him out and pushing him forward. And I think that for an end of season thing, to get Doggett into a position where he can be have a bit more agency, I think really works in this episode. I don't know if you think the same to that.
I absolutely do. I think they tried really hard in season 8 to propel Doggett into main character status, just for the sake of the show. Just for the sake of continuing it beyond Decoveney, because at this point they're like, we don't know if he's coming back or not. And I think it works. I think he's more of a leading man in season 9 than he is here in a lot of ways. And I think that's actually one of season 9's strongest suits. That said, I think Mulder's role as you said, the informant character is Deep Throat or X or whoever he's emulating. It's the perfect role for Mulder in a post X-Files unit role. It reminds me a lot, actually, and this is silly, but it reminds me a lot of David Duchovny's role in Zoolander. You ever seen
that? Oh, yeah.
Where he plays
with the hand.
Yeah, the hand model who's the informant. And just feeding them all this conspiracy information about what is going on so that they can figure out what to do next. And it's the perfect role for Mulder if he's not going to be in charge of the X-Files. It just makes a lot of sense. What maybe doesn't make as much sense is how he would have any information up his sleeve in the first place, since it ticks everyone off. This episode, giving Mulder that role and giving Doggett this, I'm kind of in charge of the X-Files role, and they're finally learning their place with each other.
Yeah.
And they're finally learning their place within this larger world and this larger conspiracy and this larger, honestly, in their relationships with Scully as well. And I think that works very well.
Again, from the way, I mean, they maybe push a little bit too hard on this going into the next season, but at the end of this double parter, we've got Doggett going, we're investigating you, Kirsch. And they quickly, over those 2 episodes, make Doggett the outsider.
Yeah.
They kind of really push on that. They really kind of go, like, he's got this vendetta against the FBI. What is he doing? Why is he doing this? He's just being an idiot. And they push really hard on that. And I think that maybe we'll talk about that when we get there in 9, but it goes a little bit too far.
Sure.
But as you say, with this is totally Mulder. This is Mulder outside of the world. It's kind of not necessarily his PTSD, but his post abduction, thought. He's become a lot less of a instilled character in the way that he would actually go out and portray stuff. But he still does have that agency, especially when it comes to Scully, that he needs to get that investigated, and he hasn't got the tools in his toolbox anymore. So to ask Doggett, to give Doggett that mentorship, to push him to do those things, even though Doggett is a well-liked character at this point, and we know obviously what happens with Crane. Did Crane go and see his kid with his boy? Was he an alien replicant at that point? Has he been changed in the space of 24 hours? The stuff like that will come to fruition. But for him to sort of say about the pissing people off and, it's a Saturday afternoon, which in my head is hang on a second, there's been a massive fire. There's been sort of remnants of sort of all this kind of stuff. And you're complaining because you're working on a Saturday. It's the FBI. It's they don't work Monday to Friday, 9 till 5. So there's a little bit of that going on as well.
That's why you almost have to wonder if he is a replicant at that point. Upset that Doggett is pushing and letting Mulder push.
I did find it. I was like, come on, hang on a second. It's the FBI would have to come out on a Saturday if there's a massive...
Yes.
I suppose they're saying jurisdiction-wise whether or not they were meant to be involved at that point or whatever. But anyway, when we go to Parenti's office, and again, this happens in Payne Manor, I do find it fascinating as well that the birth defects that we have all encased in the wall, it becomes a big theme of the season, this orange glow tint that they have throughout season 8. And, Parenti's doing some more work. He's got a woman in there, which we saw in Payne Manor, and he's doing the similar thing here. But there's this kind of, and I found it with Lev as well, where they just seem to just have everything on show, whereas in the past it might have been more of conspiratorial, dark, hidden in the zoo storage compartment where they got rid of it all in an Erlenmeyer flask. This is very much more overt and just this is what we're doing. I know there's no alien fetuses in there, but at the same time, this wall of horror and showroom, as Mulder says, they're quite overt with the things that they're trying to do. And it's obviously quite a body horror aspect for the show to showcase as well for the audience as well.
Well, it's the mad scientist idea, right? And we've seen a lot of that throughout the X-Files, whether it was the cloning experiments or just, there's various Monster of the Week episodes that do stuff like that. And it's classic X-Files. I think Carter is doing something really intentional here when he introduces this only to swipe it out from under your feet and make you think that, oh, maybe we're going to dive into this a little bit more. And then, oh, actually, we're not. And I do think that's intentional. But stuff like that, like this body horror that you're talking about, we've seen that as early as season 1. You have that at the end of, what is it, the Erlenmeyer Flask as well. Yeah. In season 1, they stumble upon that in a storage unit. And so that's very common in this show.
Normally it's hidden, it's not in plain view.
Yes.
It's just literally through a door, this one, that way, and the doctors are, anyone who would walk into, can you imagine if a argument's sake, a pregnant woman accidentally walks into that room.
You're right.
It's like, what the hell? It'd be something different. And talk about subversion, and we can talk about this now a little bit. I think it's worth talking about, is that Dr. Parenti in this moment says about, well, how come Scully's carrying the perfectly healthy child? And again, right through this episode and episodes in the future, they play on this feeling that what's wrong with my baby kind of mantra going on about what's wrong with it. Mm-hmm. What's it going to come out with? We've seen Payne and we've seen all the body horror aspects, and we pretty much find out that's not really what it's about. It's about something else. It's a different type of experiment, and they're very clear. Carter is very clear. He's saying that child is perfectly healthy, and it says time and time again. But over 8 seasons of the X-Files, we are so accustomed for it to be something is going to go wrong. Yes. That I think we get to a point where we don't actually believe what is being said.
Well, and I think that's part of what the X-Files is about, right? You're not supposed to trust anybody. And the truth is always out there. And if someone is telling you one thing, there's another theory out there somewhere else. And we see that later with Doggett and Milroor and him learning that, oh, maybe the super soldier program is actually part of a Cold War experiment that's gone awry. And Mulder's like, no, that's not the full truth. Like, this whole battle with the truth is something that the audience is supposed to be struggling with from the get-go. And that includes whether or not Scully's baby actually is healthy, actually is okay. Yeah. Whether or not William is going to come out as this mutant alien human hybrid, or a seemingly normal human being. And yeah, I think that's the tension that's going on there. And I think it's played not just in that, but also throughout every other character's arcs in this episode.
When Parenti, if we go back to Parenti's office, we do see, as you say, the Terminator element of Billy Miles, like we mentioned before. Mulder and Doggett, this is where I feel like it's a bit more like Viennan, where like Mulder's swinging the handle, the door handle, and at one point Doggett's shouting, "Mulder," kind of thing, and it's all like, oh, this is good, I like this.
Yes.
This is something, I like to see more of this, and we don't get enough of this. But Mulder gets pushed through that glass. That's memorable. Mm-hmm. I always remember that scene where he gets pushed through the glass. But what do you make to Billy Miles? And obviously it's kind of a bit of a foreshadowing later on as well of leaving Mulder, like, because everything has happened. Doggett is like shooting Miles and nothing's happening.
Right.
He ends up in that doorway and just stays there for about a good 5 or 10 seconds. And then when we come out, that Mulder's still lying there, but Miles is gone. And that's, again, foreshadowing to what happens in existence. But the fact that Billy Miles just left that as it was, because it probably wasn't his prerogative, I suppose.
Right. It just kind of makes me wonder what his programming is. What is his overall mission? And I know, obviously, in the next episode, you see that and you see more of that. And they kind of try and explain it in the truth retroactively by the time the show ends, that it's, they're trying to witness the birth of this alien baby or perfect human hybrid baby. But it kind of makes me wonder why Mulder isn't seen as a bigger threat to the colonists, given that he was seen as a huge threat by the Syndicate and the FBI and all these other agencies. And I think it's almost kind of humbling in a way that the colonists, Mulder is nothing. He's inconsequential. His quest does not matter. And I think that's a very interesting point of view to have. And I think you see that in, we're going to just keep going back to Terminator because it's an easy comparison. But you see that in Terminator movies where the Terminator doesn't kill certain people and then kills other people. And it makes a conscious choice to do that because of its directive and programming. And for whatever reason, it was okay to throw Mulder through a wall, but not kill him. And I don't really know what that reason is. I'm left kind of confused, and so is the audience. And I think maybe that's the point. There's a bit of mystery in that.
Yeah, there's the sense in Reyes gets the same treatment next episode as well, as she gets thrown into the barn. Yep. There's also there is an element as well that we will talk about towards the end about the whole Providence and Prominence episodes where Mulder has to die because of X, Y, and Z, and or they're both. And I know Krycek mentions that earlier in this season as well, which we'll talk about in a little bit more detail. But we'll get the vertebrae in that scene as well, where he does that Terminator turn around and look at Doggett, and you can see that the vertebrae in the back of the neck.
Yes,
and so Mulder's he's knocked out, he's injured, and the next kind of scene, it would be amiss of me to mention about the shipper stuff because obviously. He gets the little nose rub on when he's getting his hair cut done, and it's just great to see a scene at home with Scully and Mulder and Doggett, and the way Lizzie says like the partner's asking the right questions. You have so many connotations now that you can do. We've got Mulder, Scully, and Doggett. Then later on, you might have Doggett, Mulder and Skinner. Then you might have Reyes, Doggett and Scully, and then you've got Krycek involved as well in certain elements. So you've got so many things that you can play around with. And in this particular scene, because it's in the home as well, it feels personal. You've got the Doggett looking on, almost like an outsider looking on, and that he does have that affection, that empathy towards Scully. But on this moment, he's kind of just a little bit, I'm with you all. This is where we are. This is what we need to do, and I like that scene. I think it's especially relevant that it's in the house. I think that's a great choice of scenery for those moments, and it feels X-Files. That those battles between Doggett and Mulder do feel like an X-Files conversation.
Yes,
and we've not had that for some time.
No, it's cool to see Doggett almost take on Scully's role in this whole scenario where she's almost taking a back seat because she's so focused on the pregnancy and everything that's going on there and keeping her baby safe, whereas Mulder has to kind of step in, and even though he's no longer FBI, he still feels the need to basically take on that role that he's always had. And I think he says it later in the next episode where he has to step into being a detective, and that means coming up with whatever theory fits the bill for him to figure it out. And I really like that Doggett challenges that theory. And he's good at doing that anyway, just because he is a skeptic by nature. But but at the same time, he's fiercely loyal. You see that in all of his interactions with Mulder, that even though he sometimes despises him and sometimes he admires him, he's loyal to the truth ultimately, no matter how strange that looks or if he even believes it. And you see that in Deana, and you see that here. You see that in the truth when he testifies on Mulder's behalf. I mean, you see that in a lot of different ways. I think that's really cool and speaks a lot to his character. He's very different than Mulder in that way. I think they both have a moral code, but I think the way they go about exacting that code is very different, and I think it just makes the dynamic more interesting.
I've had discussions about like Doggett's truth is more of a justice truth.
Yes,
he wants justice, and he talks from a moral perspective of the truth needs to come out. It's a very justification sort of stuff, and he struggles with that in the likes of The Gift and things. And I think he's like and other episodes like that, especially when Skinner says about let's not talk about this, let's not rustle the feathers, and they've got to hide the truth. But his truth isn't about, I think it was Ellie I spoke to this about, his truth isn't about like finding out the truth and
right.
spreading it out. I know Mulder has changed obviously over the years and isn't so much about that now, but his truth is the justification and justice. And as you say, like instilling Doggett into the world as well, that, likes of Duffy Haskell is someone that's it's a Doggett and Scully thing. It's not a Mulder thing, Duffy. And it's quite telling that Mulder appears later on in the next scene because it is about Skinner and Doggett is the one that's going, that's Duffy Haskell in the bag.
Yep.
It is hokey, but I do like the fact that when Lizzie's on the phone and he just goes, you've just got to keep a cool head, and then off his head goes.
The karate chop to take off the head.
Yeah, it was great to see. You've got to keep a cool head, and then off his head goes. Fantastic. Again, going back to some of the, maybe not necessarily like trying to connect all the dots, but Skinner talks about human cloning like we've had in Redux, for example,
yes.
Edging more towards when Lizzie gets to talk about what she believes things have happened on. But yeah, having that Duffy Haskell and Permanum aspect to the episode links in Doggett, and I think that does it quite well. And then obviously the Skinner conversation is interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, and it links in Doggett without, as you kind of alluded to, it links him in without Mulder's involvement too. So Mulder doesn't try and outshine Doggett in that way, or it doesn't even have the opportunity to. He wasn't involved, and I think that's something that that makes Doggett not only more vital to the story, because it'd be easy to push him aside from Mulder, especially in a story like this that is so mythology heavy. But instead they incorporate him into that and set that up in earlier episodes, and I think that was really smart.
Yeah, no, it wasn't. And as I say, him coming from the outside, he came literally in from the outside as well, which thematically works in a way of the way that Kim Manners directs it as well. It turns out they are just vitamins, and we get to see Denise Crosby, otherwise known as Tasha Yar from Star Trek Next Generation, in that moment as well. That subversion of like, what's she doing? What's these drugs doing? What are they thinking? It's these multivitamins. And then we get the conversation with Lizzie. And what I particularly picked out on this scene where Lizzie was talking about the cloning experiments, the alien fetus, the alien babies that were being born as part of the project. And that was the ultimate goal, was to get to the tissue samples. And it alludes to the fact that Scully's actually a different case in point. And that she is she's holding the perfect, the perfect human being as such at this point. And she talks about like cloning the egg and alien DNA, something that will be picked up next season, and the stem cells and stuff, as I say, for the experiments. Having this idea of a human child with no frailties, it starts to get into some of the elements that will plague the show for the future. There's so many different explanations for the baby. It's is it the experiment with the tissue, the stem cells? Then is it the chlorination in next season? Is it a miracle child? Is it just Mulder's baby? All that kind of thing. And this is the beginning of that. It is interesting that Chris Carter has this in his mind right now, and how it plays out in later seasons as well. I mean, we don't want to necessarily go into too much thing on that, but this idea of like a new Gibson praise as such is kind of like it's alluding to in some ways, isn't it, really?
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I think it even goes beyond that. I think it goes to like the scandals surrounding something like the Nativity story. And you see that a lot more in the next episode. Obviously, you have Scully giving birth with all these witnesses around witnessing the birth of this like new alien human messiah figure. And it's very reminiscent of the nativity story told in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Well, actually not John, but the other three. And I think Chris Carter has that in mind. And that's a motif that William is a Christ figure is throughout the rest of the show. And that includes obviously the revival seasons as well, very heavily, actually, especially in the final episode of the show. It kind of has to start somewhere. And you see that start here with all of these questions being asked, like whose baby is this? How did this happen? How did this come to be? And it's not unlike a lot of the scandals surrounding, the Virgin Mary at that time too, in biblical story, where many thought, well, maybe she slept with this person, or maybe she was unfaithful, or whatever it was. And well, no, actually, it wasn't any of that. It was actually a miracle. And that's, of course, I think what Chris Carter is ultimately alluding to here with William, and Mulder alludes to at the end of the episode as well. So the end of the next episode, I should say, as well.
And this is where it kind of gets a bit frantic a little bit, and things start to move around quite a bit, because we've got Lizzie saying that, and then we've noticed this throughout this episode, actually, there's a jump. It goes from like Parenti's office to somewhere else, back to Parenti's office, Scully's apartment, then we go to somewhere else, and then we've got the Duffy thing. Then we go to the Lizzie moment in the FBI, but then from Lizzie's FBI, we go back to the house, and
it's super fast.
Yeah, and it starts to like sort of do a lot of like things going on, because in the next couple of scenes, we've got the Duffy Haskell Lizzie kind of reveal of like this potential looking for the perfect human. Then we're jumping around a little bit, because you've got Doggett being called by Miles, or the FBI being called by Miles to like take them back to Parenti's office, which is all a lure, so that Miles can go and get Scully and Mulder and the baby. And then we kind of get these scenes, and there's a couple of directional stuff that I think Kim Manners does really well, and I'll just mention them right here before we actually go into any more detail. So when we've got like the lure, and as you say, the Terminator thing where Doggett sees Miles in the distance, and stuff like that works really well. But the things like the moving between cars, Krycek turns up, and the way that Kim Manners does it, it flows. Later on in the episode, when they are in the FBI, it kind of, when Krycek gets Scully, it goes from Krycek and Scully down into the basement, then hands over to Doggett, who then hands over to Skinner, then hands over to Doggett, then hands over to Reyes, and then she's off her way. And I like the way it's filmed. I think it's just, it's like that natural flow and propulsion to it. In regards to, though, the kind of aspects of it, that Krycek does turn up, what do you think to Krycek's motivations in this episode?
I think, like always, Krycek's motivations are super selfish and also super unclear. Because you never really know who he's working for or why, and you never really get any answers. And honestly, his end in the next episode, I think, is very satisfying, but it's also kind of not satisfying because we don't really understand why. But I think it's interesting. I think here you're meant to believe that he has finally recognized that what the colonists are really trying to do. And I think that freaks him out. And I think that's a very interesting idea, that somebody like him who shows very little fear generally, aside from being possessed by a black oil virus, has fear and is trying to play it cool. And I really liked what you said earlier about the way that Kim Manners shoots this episode, and how it's all very seamless and, very one step after another. And again, to go back to it, I think there's a lot about this episode, and maybe this is why I like it so much, that feels very Terminator to me. From the moment Krycek shows up, and it's this "come with me if you want to live" moment.
Yeah.
Saving Mulder and Scully, to him being the Kyle Reese figure, taking Scully, who is the Sarah Connor with John Connor in the loom, running from this Terminator that's after that. I mean, it feels exactly like that in all of the best ways.
Yeah.
And it's not overwhelming. It's not a way where you look at that and you're like, oh, well, they just copied this. No, it makes sense. And Kim Manners does a fantastic job of adapting that material and making it his own while still allowing it to feel familiar. And I think Krycek is a really interesting character to throw into that mix, because he doesn't really care about anybody in that room. whereas they all care about each other, but he doesn't really care. So his motivations are very, very questionable at best. And I think that's, nobody really trusts him. It's warranted.
He's not necessarily like a subjective person, is he? He's kind of quite objective in like the here and now. So he'll look at the state of affairs and make a decision based on that,
right?
Rather than actually being like, I'm going to hold my allegiance to Mulder, I'm going to hold my allegiance to Cigarette Smoking Man. It's like he's going which way the wind blows.
Yes. He wants to be on the winning side no matter what side that is.
And in this one, because he talks about what happened in the previous episode where they said, you want to kill Scully's baby. He said, well, I wanted to kill the truth. I wanted to like not let them be aware that this was a potential. Yeah. And in that, he's kind of like, he's gone from, okay, well, they found out now, to like almost like accepting the fact, well, they found out, this is inevitable, this is going to happen.
Yep.
It's just, it's a difficult one to pass. Like you say, it's like, whereabout is he in this? Because Krycek is, Mulder gives Scully to Krycek, and it's like,
like, you know, why do you trust him?
yeah. You know, it's difficult to fully pass because of the way Krycek is, but he does seem to be, look, we'll fight the fight. We think we can, you know, do whatever. But I just find it really fascinating. And he's the one, as you say, with the religious analogy, he's the one that says the barren womb, you know, they think it's a miracle. They think this. And then Mulder starts to talk about God, which is in some ways a little bit off-putting because we're not used to hearing Mulder talk in that way, that sense either.
Yeah.
So it's actually Krycek the one that's like saying from an objective point of view, they believe that this may be the next Jesus Christ, is what he's effectively saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Krycek kind of plays the role of the angelic messenger, right? Who's kind of giving all this information and explaining that, yeah, this child is going to change everything. And the next, whatever happens next, not only is your world going to change, but it's going to change the events of the invasion or whatever it is that's coming next. And for Mulder to see that for what it is, I think is very interesting too. Because I think if this were to happen a few years prior, you know, I think Mulder would have maybe fought that idea. He would have maybe fought this idea that, not that it's a miracle, because I think he would have believed that, but maybe the implications of what William could mean. He might have fought that, maybe even just for Scully's sake. But here he jumps on it immediately for whatever reason, and I think it's because he ultimately knows that if Krycek knows anything, he is very close to the truth, even if he doesn't live by it himself. And I think that's a very interesting idea.
Yeah, and just I think the way that Mulder does say, like, they believe he's God or they believe in God, or it's a higher power. You know, and I think the way that they actually film Mulder at that point is like they're filming him from below.
Yeah.
The camera's pointing up at him. So it's from like Scully's and Krycek's viewpoint that we're seeing Mulder say that, you know, and that illusion of like sort of him.
He's ascending in a way.
Yeah, it's interesting the way they do that. Talking about Krycek, so when Krycek does run over Billy Miles, I only noticed it the second time round, but there's some cables underneath the car, which they've obviously like pulled or something as the car's hit the dummy or wherever it is. It's quite clear, these two cables, especially in HD. But then second scene, they're gone. So it's like, all right, okay, they've obviously used some sort of dolly or something to pull the car down.
I love that.
I'd say with it, just the way that, and I just love the way that the window comes down and he just sort of pops out and, as I say, does the Terminator, come with me if you want to live thing. Krycek's face just warrants that. You know, whenever he's lit in that way, it's like, because you see him so many times do that over the course of the show's run that, you know, as soon as you see his face appear, it's like, here we go. What about Doggett in those scenes though? Because he's the one, and again, going back into the way that Doggett is instilled into the mythology now, because he's the one that's going, you're going to trust somebody who tried to kill me? You know, so he's got his own beef with, I mean, everyone's got their own beef with Krycek, but
who doesn't, right?
Yeah, exactly. But he has now got some beef with him, and Doggett is finding it difficult to understand why Mulder's taking it at face value. And just thinking it from Doggett's point of view, that actually is another nuance, which I really like. He's the one, Doggett's going, hang on a second, these are obviously my arch nemesis kind of thing. You know, I've just had a fight with him where I've hung out outside of a car, and now you're listening to him. What is going on here? So he's starting to understand the mythology aspect of it.
And I think you almost have to have that character, because I think that that really grounds what's happening, right? Because at this point, everybody else knows what is going on. They're aware of the mystery, or not the mystery, the mythology. They're aware of the colonists and the plans and all these sorts of extraterrestrial things, right? And Doggett is the only one who is trying to stay level-headed and keep everything on Earth, right? And so you almost need that character to anchor the story and keep it from getting maybe what you were saying earlier about going too sci-fi, right? And maybe that's part of his role here, and he does the job well. He does that justice.
Yeah, it does. I think this is where X-Files becomes as you say, with it, the Terminator aspect of it. I love the X-Files, my favorite TV shows ever. I love Terminator 2, one of my favorite movies ever. They're two very different things, you know. So a liquid metal man running after in a police uniform, running after a car, and then slapping his thing on there, and then get it cut off, and rattling on the back of a hood, is different to Mulder running away after somebody, or the way that X-Files runs. And I think that X-Files kind of leans more into this, and I know people will have this more comic booky, the terminology, which I know Darren Mooney's talked about quite a lot, that you get the term super soldier, that things are starting to become more of this sci-fi elemented show. And over the seasons, it's very grounded. And I think that obviously the Doggett does well to ground it. I think talking about evil and things like that is quite a good position for X-Files to go into, because it has gone into that mode before. The sci-fi elements, yes, we've got Brian Thompson as the alien bounty hunter, which is a Terminator-esque kind of thing, but it's done in a different way.
Yeah.
And the propulsion of this episode, like you say, potentially maybe is the reason why, is it just feels like it's just edging towards that science fiction trope. And it obviously coming into the first couple of minutes of next episode where we get the vertebrae, it's like, and I actually exhale a little bit, because it's like, okay, it's gone too far. Mulder dying for those 3 months was like the tipping point. It was like sort of like, you've closed all of them, you put all the coffin nails in, and you've just got one left to go. And the vertebrae was like the last one to go. Okay, it's gone too far.
So Jump the Shark was not jumping the shark for you.
It did. And that's not to say that I don't like. I just have to. I struggle with it. I think that I struggle with the death, and I struggle with the vertebrae, and it's, for me, it's when, as daft as it is, because there'll be other people go, oh, it went ages ago. Mythology was gone ages ago. But for me, these are the two moments what kind of like goes, Kurt's mythology kind of thing starts to creak. It starts to go, oh, I'm not 100% sure on this lot. But yeah, that's the way things are, unfortunately. I also like in these scenes as well, when we talk to Reyes coming in, with Mulder says about sort of Reyes coming in and doing the call. We get all the parking lot scenes, and again talking about the direction of stuff, and it feels like the scenes in the elevator shafts is like sort of the protective bubble. So you've got all these characters around Mulder and Scully, because it is Mulder and Scully at this point. It's not Mulder doing his own thing; it's Mulder and Scully doing this thing together, and obviously getting Scully out the way. And eventually the reason why we have Krycek being why Scully goes with Krycek is because Mulder ultimately wants to have the action piece of like getting rid of the super soldier. It would have been interesting if they actually used Krycek the other way around, if it was Mulder and Scully gone, Mulder and Krycek switched. That would have been fascinating to see if that would have worked, because I think it would have. I don't think those two characters overall have a major input either way, but I suppose you've got, because you would have had Mulder looking after Scully. I don't know if that would have maybe just been a bit too much for the viewing of it. But I personally think both characters could have played either role there.
I agree, and I echo what I said earlier, when it just doesn't make sense to me that Mulder would trust Krycek to watch after Scully in that moment, and not do something selfish or look after himself, or even turn her over as a double agent, because we know he's double crossed them before, and it wouldn't even be a surprise if he had done that again. And so it feels, yes, Mulder, of course, would lay down his life for Scully and the baby. And that's, I think, the point they're trying to emphasize here with him facing off against Billy Miles and doing that final action scene that you were talking about. But at the same time, in terms of character, in terms of story, I don't know if I buy it. Obviously it's what happened, so we got to take it at face value. But yeah, I don't know if I buy that. I think I agree that it almost makes more sense that Krychek would be up there with Skinner to take down Billy Miles than it would Nowhere. Also, it would be very interesting to see those two working together after their own beef to take down the super soldier, only for, their final confrontation in the next episode. So I feel like that would have almost added to that as well.
Actually, thinking about that, that would have. It would have, wouldn't it? The fact that they had one moment where they actually worked together, and then the next moment is when we've had enough of him. So that would have been an interesting play. Maybe we should just rewrite it. It'd be fine.
Yeah.
I don't think there's much more. We've got Agent Crane. We find out is a super soldier. The perfectly placed, or do we think Crane organised bin lorry or garbage truck? Because it seems a bit strange, that garbage truck, that whole thing. I'm not quite sure what I think about it. What do you think about it?
It seems almost to me like maybe the whole plan was to get Scully isolated in the first place, right? Like maybe him bringing in this garbage truck and is apparently, killing Billy Miles. That's obviously not what happened either. It seems like maybe this was part of the play to try
to make Scully feel more safe.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And especially leading into the next episode where you see Crane and Aurora interacting a lot more, and there's that suspicion going on there. It just seems like that was maybe intentional.
Yeah, I think it was intentional. I know Tony in the mailbag mentions it, so we'll go back into there. So let's go back to the top of the hour then.
Are we going to get in trouble?
We probably will get in trouble at this point, yes. Okay, so this is what Mulder says, right? Okay, so we call it the miracle of life, conception, a union of perfect opposites, essence transforming into existence, an act without which mankind would not exist and humanity cease to exist. Or is it just nostalgia now, an act of biology commandeered by modern science and technology? Godlike, we extract, implant, inseminate, and we clone. Has our ingenuity rendered the miracle into a simple trick? In the artifice of replicating life, can we become the creator? Then what of the soul? Can it, too, be replicated? Does it live in this matter we call DNA? Or is it placement of the opposite of artifice, capable only by God? How did this child come to be? What set its heart beating? Is it a product of a union, or the work of a divine hand, an answered prayer, a true miracle? Or is it the wonder of technology, the intervention of other hands? What do I tell this child about to be born? What do I tell Scully? And what do I tell myself? That screams out modern monologues in the Revival series for a start off.
Oh, yeah.
David Duchovny's voice as well. I'd never really cottoned onto it, but the voice is more like the My Struggles. Obviously, his aging voice is actually starting to come through. And I've never really heard that before, and obviously listened to that. But there's a lot to go into that. I mean, what do you make to... As I say, this talking about it has to start somewhere. This is where it starts. This is where everything that happens from now onwards. We've got Noel Raw saying the chip was clicked into the back of the neck and made her pregnant. We've got the chlorination stuff that's in the water that made her pregnant. We've got the miracle that made her pregnant. There's a lot of things in there, and there's also like the debate about God and intervention, divine hands, true miracles, and technology, all wrapped into one here. So this is, as I say, this is a big, big topic. What are your general thoughts on that opening scene?
I think it's here that Chris Carter perfectly encapsulates the ideas of philosophy and maybe even theology that the X-Files has talked about in the past 8 years. I think he's reminiscing and reflecting on everything that Mulder and Scully have been through, on everything that they have or haven't seen, on every story that's been told, both mythology and Monster of the Week. I really like it. I really like this idea. I think it reminds me a lot of Ian Malcolm in Jurassic Park, who says stuff like, just because we can doesn't mean we should. And are we playing God by doing this thing? And these are the age-old questions that all science fiction is asked, well back into Frankenstein. And it's the same questions we continue to ask to this day. And sci-fi continues to ask to this day. And I don't know if there's fully an answer. And I think that's part of the reason we ask the question. And at the same time, I think why can't it be all of these things? Right. Why can't the chip have contributed? Why can't, Mulder genuinely be the father? Why can't it be the water? Why can't it also be a miracle? Because like at the end of the day, it is a miracle since we know that Scully was barren. Right. And so it is, in a very real sense, that fits the bill. So why can't it be all of these things? And these questions of, can we replace the soul? Can it be replicated? I think when you look at the alien replicants like Billy Miles and Aurora, you almost see that it can't be, right? Because they're not real. They're almost automatonish. They're programmed. Whereas someone like William, who does come from Scully and does, in my opinion, that's a debate, come from Mulder, he very clearly has emotion. He very clearly has a soul, as we see in the Revival series. And so, I don't know. There's a lot of really interesting questions that I think Chris Carter carries on into his mythology episodes in the Revival. And whether or not that's satisfactory for everybody, I think it's really interesting that he continues to explore what he sets up here. And yeah, I really like it. I think it's a really strong opening to an episode. And it, right off the bat, it hooks you. Right off the bat, it's like, we're throwing you into this. And these are the questions we're asking. And maybe come with us. Maybe we have the answers. Maybe we don't.
Yeah.
And maybe you need to decide for yourself what those answers are. And I think that's very interesting and something the X-Files has always been great at.
I'm going to take a little bit of a wild like sort of left field opinion here, but
go for it.
I love like Twin Peaks. You're not going to understand what David Lynch has done. No matter what you try or how you try, you can have an idea of what you think. But the way that David Lynch works is that you can extrapolate what you need to extrapolate from. And I think Chris Carter is from that wheelhouse. I have always said that. I've always said that I think Lynch is definitely an influence on Chris Carter's writing and the way that he does it. I think Chris Carter is more overt and more linked into the real world than David Lynch is. David Lynch is very, very abstract, and
yes,
Carter does have some abstract nature to him. He's also got a lot of mythology abstract nature to him. If you listen to some of the recent Saratoga Springs X-Files Museum conversation that he has, and he talks about that in there as well, about Mulder and Scully and the baby. And he talks about various different mythology. Reading those lines and listening to them, I think this is probably one of the most intricate and full monologues that I've heard him ever do. This is asking the big questions. Why couldn't it be everything? I think the danger that he has in later seasons, he kind of, because of the way that the My Struggles are set up, for example, and I'm not going to go into that conversation, but they become more directed at that person. It is asking those questions. I personally don't think you need to have an answer to it. I would honestly think to go down the route of what Chris Carter has done in the future and in the past. Ask these questions, let it sit there in the ether. The very nature of like the cloning and the miracles and the science and, as you say, theology and philosophy about what is the real world, what is the social construct, what is the interpolation of stuff. All of that is stuff that has been theorized over a millennia, Greek mythology, Greek philosophy. I just think it's open for comment and open for discussion. Where it gets a problem later on is potentially because it focuses on certain elements of that and it doesn't come across as well. But here, I think it's absolutely the perfect distillation of what he's trying to get at. And like you've said, I think it's a wonderful voiceover and fitting of what would be if season 8 was to finish. The ending of that would be absolutely a perfect to do that. What do you make to existence then? Especially given, we're talking about the religious analogy and the stars and and all that type of thing. And what do you make generally to the episode?
I think sometimes Chris Carter gets a bad rap. I think a lot of people, well, and it ultimately is down to personal opinion and what you prefer and what you like. But I know there's a lot of people who don't necessarily like his episodes of the X-Files particularly too much. There's other writers who are arguably better, and I'm no stranger to that, and I agree. But I think Carter had a very specific vision for the show and what he wanted it to be. And while he might not have always known where that was going, he always knew where he was in the moment. And I think that's a very interesting idea. And his threads here in existence that, all these nativity ideas like the star and the witnesses and there's no room for them in the inn sort of thing because they're in this abandoned ghost town instead and whatnot. But it's an abandoned town. I think all
because
that's...
the water's dried up, which I find interesting as well, that the waters are dried up.
Yes, exactly. And then her water breaks and there it is. I think there's a lot of really cool religious imagery to that I think fits with Scully's character very well anyway. Stuff that Carter would continue on into the revival seasons, which his stuff with William in those seasons, I actually like for the most part. I think that's really interesting, him being this kind of Christ figure and resurrection and these abilities and all those different things, being hated for his difference. Very interesting. I like all of that. And I think it all starts here.
Right. Okay. So we've got 2 comments for Essence. No doubt we'll have some for Existence when we do that next week. Two comments for the mailbag, which we'll just go and have a look at now. Tony and Liam Shane Gocklin got in touch. We shall have a look at what they've said. So Tony says, a very strong opener to a climatic story that consolidates everything Season 8 has built towards. There had never been a season before of the X-Files structured like this, more in line with the serialized Joss Whedon model, and that makes Essence quite unique as part 1 of a season finale. Indeed, this is the first time X-Files ended a season with a 2-part story. Good character work building to admittedly slightly daft climax. Never has a bin lorry been more perfectly placed, but it sets up a stronger hour beyond it well. Yeah, so the bin lorry we've mentioned. It is, to be fair, he is just saying about it being placed. So how did Crane? Well, how would Crane know that that's where they're going to push him over the edge?
Right.
But yeah, the fact that it's a 2-parter finale as well. It's not something that we've had 3-parters, and it's always been the first part of 3, or the first part of 2, or even in Erlenmeyer Flask, pretty much the only part. And the Joss Whedon's kind of serialization model. I know we've talked about the serialization before, but it's the good character work building, and as I say, the ensemble for me really pulls across. Requiem was kind of like the first major ensemble stuff, wasn't it? Really, But yeah, to have that, have it like sort of sets up a stronger hour, and having the time to give Existence the air that it probably needs is probably a good way. A good reason why 8 is the way it is.
I totally agree. You can't tell this story in one episode.
Liam Shane Coughlin has said, plotted more adroitly than a butterfly's backpack. You can almost hear the clunk of the series moving up a level as the disparate elements of the season are placed upon the chessboard one final time. Some strong character work at play here, perhaps amongst the most depth of the season, as the overarching threads of the year mature to a climax. Parenthood, absence serving as catalyst, the realization that the true answers we seek remain in ourselves. This is a Mulder and Scully defined entirely by their bond to each other. Shorn of the FBI and navigating a path towards a quiet epiphany and perhaps, just perhaps, a united future as a family. In essence, pardon the pun, this is a perfect a conclusion to the show as we could have ever hoped for. Parenthood is something that we've not really talked about. I think Mulder says a couple of times in at one point, doesn't he? He says something along the lines like, "This is not about the X-Files. It's not an unending X-Files." What Scully says, "I'm an unending X-File," and he says it's only about you. And if you look at where he was in the pilot with his sister compared to where he is now, he's a much changed man.
Yeah, and a lot of that obviously has to do with his closure intent, but also Mulder has just grown. He's just spent so much time chasing after the truth that he realizes that he's always going to be on an endless pursuit unless he does something else. And I think him taking these steps to protect Scully and the baby and them to kind of form this nuclear family parental unit, it shows some sort of sign of maturity in him that he didn't have before. He was very much a lone wolf for a long time. And even when Scully was first around, he's still a little bit of a lone wolf until she broke through his walls. And here we see him finally creating and protecting his own pack. And I think that's fascinating and works really well.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to finish the episode as well. So thank you, Micah, for joining me.
Yeah.
We'll hopefully get you on some season 9 goodness.
Yes, absolutely.
Or badness, depending on the episode. We'll see.
Hey, it could be fun.
Hey, we'll be, some of the worst episodes are the best ones to do.
Yes.
Yeah, so it should be good. As I say, there's a lot to look forward to in season 9, as much as it is derided or generally considered the worst season of the show. But that being said, it's still better than some TV out there.
Yeah.
There's a lot worse TV to have. If people are wanting to get more of you, mentioned like the Terminator franchise and stuff like that, where can people find you online and get some more of you?
Yeah, I host a Terminator podcast called No Fate, a Terminator podcast that you can find on pretty much all of the general podcasting platforms, but you can especially find us on our website, nofatepodcast.com. We're also on Twitter at nofatepod. And yeah, we just cover everything Terminator. So we've talked about all of the films. We're currently working our way through the Sarah Connor Chronicles series. We also have a few other bonus contents and different things in story. We want to talk about the video games, comic books, and a bunch of different mythologies behind the series as well. So we're diving deep. This isn't just your standard, we're talking about movies and moving on. We dive deep into all the themes surrounding Terminator here. So it's a lot of fun.
Excellent.
And yeah, if you love Robert Patrick, you can find us talking about him and a lot of others there. I also write for Collider and Looper, where I have written a few pieces on the X-Files. Most recently, a piece called The X-Files, Why Robert Patrick's John Doggett Deserves Some Love. So go check that out for fans of Doggett. If you love him as much as I do, hopefully you'll enjoy that.
I have checked that out, and you've done some Millennium pieces as well, which have been good. So that's the best place to catch you. That's great. With me, I've decided after much consideration, I just need to get a Linktree because I've got too many things going on. So you can find me on Linktree. So that's linktr.ee/rmuldrake. That's RMULDRAKE. I'm just pulling that together, but I've got YouTube on there. I've got the Star Trek Picard podcast, the X-Cast, No Book Club, a Yellow Jackets podcast, the Shipwrecked and Comatose, the Red Dwarf podcast, The Time Is Now, my Twitter account. Everything you could possibly want from me is on there. But that's the best place to find me. But of course, you can find me on the X-Cast as you all know. So thank you, Michael, for joining me. We'll be heading into the season finale Existence next week. It should be a fun ride. We're going to have some great times with that, and then hopefully have a season 8 review with Chris Knowles again, like we've done for the past 2 seasons. So please join us for that. But until next time, remember, as always, trust no one.
Do you know your Daleks from your Drashigs?
Or your Zygons from your Zagreus?
Do you know what the TARDIS stands for?
And do you know which Doctor Who stories featured Kevin Grimlock, the cyborg T-Rex that became the Doctor's companion?
Then this is a Doctor Who podcast for you. I'm Baz Green, and each fortnight I chat to my son Ben.
Hello.
And the occasional guest as we cover 60 years of Doctor Who on TV, Big Finish, and more.
And I did really enjoy that one. Except that wasn't really actual pirates, it was Badger pirates in space, but it was still piratey.
Badger Pirates in Space?
Yes. But I am willing to make an exception for pirates this episode.
Donald Sumpter is amazing.
He's good.
I love the fact that he just pops up. He just pops up. Probably Rassilon. Probably.
Well, they do confirm later on he is.
I think they do.
Yeah,
go
he
there.
says I'm Rassilon the Redeemer.
Of course he does. Bloody hell.
And he has the gauntlet as well, which gives the hint at that.
Yeah.
I'm nodding profusely.
Yeah. We're going proper classic Doctor Who as well, a lot of it as well.
Yes.
In a week has done more for the show than for the last 5 years.
I do like how Ross D. Davies is kind of the PR spokesman for the Centurion special. That's quite fun.
Yeah. And he's also saying, oh, well, Jodie and Chibnall still have an episode left. I'm not going to tread on their feet, but he is 14, just so you know, for the filming purposes. And a week later, oh yeah, by the way, these guys are back. Just thought you'd want to know. Find us on the We Made This network.
And all good podcast providers.
What about the bad ones?
Yes, them too.
Ah, good.
Because somewhere there's danger.
Somewhere there's injustice.
Somewhere else, the tea's getting cold.
You know, we probably should throw that tea away now. It has been sat there since 1989.
The X-Cast, an X-Files podcast, was created by Tony Black and is produced and hosted by Carl Sweeney, Sarah Blair and Kurt North.
You can find the podcast on Twitter at the X_cast, on Facebook by typing in the X-Cast, and in our group, X-Files Basement, the X-Cast podcast fan group, and on Instagram at the X-Cast pod.
Don't forget, you can support the show by becoming a member on Patreon. Our patrons get early access to episodes, behind-the-scenes chats with our hosts and a thriving community of X-Files, and other premium interviews and specials. To find out more and subscribe, you can go to patreon.com/thexcast. That's patreon.com/thexcast.
We are also part of the We Made This podcast network, full of popular culture shows, including our Millennium series, The Time Is Now. You can find all of our shows at our website, wemadethispod.com, or via Twitter at wemadethispod.
Thanks for listening and keep watching the skies.